Economics of incentives, contract theory, and social choice theory. European Economic Association, an honorary fellow of St. John's College in Cambridge, and a corresponding fellow of the British Academy. He was named Monash Distinguished Visiting Scholar at Monash University and honorary professor at Wuhan University and at Tsinghua University. He received various honorary doctorate degrees, and he was awarded the Everett Cam Award in Environmental Economics in 2007. Professor Maskin has served as editor or associate editor for many journals, including the quarterly journals of economics, economics lectures, social choice and welfare. Markets have failed to reduce inequality. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Eric Maskin.
A nice welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here at the National University of Management this afternoon and to have the opportunity to talk to you about a subject which has concerned me now for the development of global markets and inequality. This is a subject which I think has special relevance to the Cambodian situation, and that's why I'm particularly excited about the opportunity of talking with you about it this afternoon. I think it's evident to us all that over the last 20 years or so, there has been an enormous increase in globalization. And by that I mean trade of goods and services between countries, so a great deal more production of goods and services across national boundaries. The reasons for this, I think, are quite clear. Thanks to modern technology, it's now much less costly to send goods long distances. And perhaps even more important, it's now less costly to communicate over years. So in many parts of the world, tariffs are now much. Is a free trade area. And now, in this part of the world, we have the China-ASEAN free trade area as of just a few weeks ago. And all of these free trade groups have promoted globalization. Globalization has come with many promises. Globalization have argued that globalization is the key to bringing prosperity to developing countries. And in fact, this promise has been realized in many cases. Many countries around the world, including Cambodia, have grown enormously thanks to global markets. Cambodia, for example, has a flourishing garment industry which has succeeded in boosting Cambodian exports considerably. And China and India improvements in their economies thanks to their exploitation of local markets. But there's another promise that globalization made which has not been realized, and that is to reduce inequality, to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots in developing countries. In fact, in most developing countries where global markets have played a large role over the last we've seen inequality increase. And Cambodia is, again, an example. Despite the considerable economic progress that Cambodia has made, inequality has increased significantly. Thing has occurred. And that, I think, is cause for real concern. Because rising inequality is troublesome. It's troublesome from the standpoint, first, of I think we all believe that all people should be treated equally. All people are born equal, and when are attributable not to pure merits, but to the accident of where you happen to be born. That affronts our sense of morality. But even if you may well be concerned with the elimination of poverty. And when inequality goes up in developing countries, we also see getting rid of inequality is also a way of getting rid of poverty. But even if you don't accept that explanation for why we should worry about inequality, there is a very practical reason, which is that countries who are characterized by huge income disparities, by huge income inequality, also tend to be quite unstable politically. And so simply for the purpose of keeping your country together politically and socially, it is important to deal adequately with inequality. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that inequality has in fact increased in many developing countries as a result of the recent globalization. Should we be surprised by that? I would say that there is a real sense in which this did come as a surprise. And that's because this increase in inequality contradicts one of the best established principles in economics, a principle which has withstood the test of time for over 200 years now, namely the theory of comparative advantage. It has been a great success in helping us understand all the previous globalizations that have occurred in the last 200 years, and there have been many of them. In each case, except for the most recent globalization, globalization led to a decrease in inequality in developing countries. So it's worth examining the theory of comparative advantage for a few minutes to see why it made the prediction. That prediction turned out to be false. So the theory of comparative advantage says that the reason why countries trade with one another is because they differ in their factors of production. A factor of production is an input to the production process, and probably the most important factor of production is labor. So you can't produce anything without labor. In fact, labor is not. There is high skill labor and there is low skill labor, and from the standpoint of the theory of comparative advantage, the reason why countries trade with one another is because they differ in their relative endowments of high skill and low skill labor. But let me illustrate what I mean. Let's look at two countries. One is a rich country, one is a developing country. The reason why the rich country is rich is to make it rich or make it poor. So rich countries have a higher proportion of high-skilled workers. Developing countries have a higher proportion of low-skilled workers. That difference means that rich countries have a comparative advantage in producing goods where high-skilled workers are particularly needed. Goods such as computer software, highly technical goods. Developing countries have a comparative advantage producing goods where skill doesn't matter so much. And agricultural goods such as rice tend to fall in this category. Now, what I want to do is to examine the effects of globalization on production. And according to the theory of comparative advantage. And to do that, what I'm going to do is to perform a thought experiment. I want to look at production before globalization occurs, that is, before the rich country and the poor country, the developing country, can trade with one another. And then I want to look at production after globalization has occurred, after trade is opened up. And the difference between those two must be the result of the increase in globalization. So what will happen before globalization occurs, before the rich country and the developing country can trade? Well, if the rich country can't trade, then anything that its consumers get to consume, anything that citizens of the rich country get to consume, must be produced in the rich country. So that means that the rich country is going to have to produce both software and rice if citizens of the rich country are going to get to consume both software and rice. And similarly, in the developing country, both software and rice will have to be produced if citizens in that country get both goods. Use of the labor force, because after all, the labor force has mostly unskilled workers, and so to the extent that software is being produced, and remember, software requires high-skilled workers. To the extent that software is being produced, it's a distortion of the best use of the developing country's labor force. In other words, the low producers don't need these low-skilled workers. That means that there's not going to be much demand for the low-skilled workers' services. That means that to the extent that production is put into software rather than rice, the wage for those skilled workers will be depressed. But just the opposite is true for the high-skilled workers in the developing country if software is produced. High-skilled workers are very much needed for software, and therefore their wages